All right, I think we've settled that. So why don't we get started? So I'll start fresh, and partly for the recording, this is kind of where we'll get into it. So um, my name is Josh Hadrian. I'm managing director of the Triple Aif Consortium. Um, and this is kind of a special call that the Triple Aif community is putting on, but we do regular calls. So many of you are familiar faces, but for those joining, we do these regularly. And this is the first in kind of a series that we are hoping to do or planning to do around kind of nation scale efforts, a little bit maybe larger even than some of the other projects that we featured. So today we're excited to have folks joining us involved with the Towards a National Collection project or effort in the UK. We have Rebecca Bailey, and Joe Padfield, and we'll get to their presentations in just a moment. But I do want to go through just a couple quick announcements, and then we will dive into it. And we will have, I think, plenty of time for Q&A today, and maybe we can, have some discussion about ways that these sorts of projects can manifest in other places. Okay, so first thing to announce is our fall working meeting, the Triple Aif fall working meeting. I've just pasted the link there. The Eventbrite, that is a tradition in the Triple Aif community where basically we, in the other part of the year, away from our annual conference, we gather together for 3 or 5 days and kind of try to tackle meetings and issues and that can community forward, whether in terms of the specifications or in terms of other social elements, community dynamics. So that's December 1st through 4th. We hope you join us. It's completely free. We're doing it online, and there's probably something for everybody in that program. And the other piece that I will mention is the trainings that we have done. So we've sold out the last number of trainings that we've done. This is a relatively new offering from Triple Aif Consortium this year. I've just pasted the link there. But it's 5-day kind of partially synchronous, partially asynchronous training. We are offering the next one in the last week of November. And we recognize that for US folks, that is not a great week, but it's really geared toward Triple Aif community folks in Europe, UK, Africa. That's really where the time zone is geared toward. And so in 2021, we'll be doing a number of other trainings kind of directed at time zones all over. So if you miss this one, there will be future ones to join. I think we have enough people here. We do love to do introductions, but I worry that that getting introduced to all of you might take too large a chunk of time. So I'm gonna forego that. But if this is a first call for you, or if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, that's a way we've done it in the past, and that's kind of a lovely way to see the variety of folks we have on the call today. So I think that is it in terms of announcements. I guess Meg and Glenn from the Triple Aif side, is there anything else to talk about today?
Nothing that I can think of.
Okay, and I'll open it up. Does anyone out there have an announcement that they'd like to share with the Triple Aif community? Fair enough. Well, the chat throughout. So with that, let me make sure I'm not missing on our agenda. And I'm not. So with that, I think we'll turn to the main portion of the program today. I mentioned it earlier, but I think we'll move into kind of 2 shortish presentations or conversations here. We'll start with Rebecca Bailey, who's the program director for Towards a National Collection. And then we'll hear from Joe Padfield, who's a conservation scientist at the National Gallery in London. and is also a PI on one of the current Towards a National Collection projects. So I might get into this, but there's kind of different phases of this. So the Foundations project, I believe, is that right? Is that the current one? Is underway. So Joe, talk a little bit about a current project that's going on that has a strong AAA connection. And then upcoming, there will be a series of discovery projects that are to be funded. And so we'll hear a bit more about that. So let me hand it over to you, Rebecca, first. I think you should have the ability to share the screen, but take it away and we can get started.
Okay, I've done this confusingly and my camera's on one screen and my presentation's on another, so I apologize that you won't get eye contact from me. So it's great to speak to you all. I've been scanning who's here to see if any applicants to our fund are on screen. I don't think we've got too many. Let me just put this on full screen. Okay, is that working for you? Yep, okay.
Great.
So Towards the National Collection is a new national program, and our intention is essentially to support research that breaks down the barriers that exist between the UK's cultural heritage collections, and our aim is to open them up to new research opportunities and to encourage the public to explore them in new ways. In terms of our structure and our funding, we have £18.9 million of money to spend over 5 years. That comes through something called the Strategic Priorities Fund and is delivered through UK Research and Innovation, which is the umbrella body for the research councils in the UK, and it's then fed through the Arts and Humanities Research Council. As Josh said, we have 2 phases to the funding. The first, we have 1.6 million for 8 foundation projects. And the second, that we're just going into, we have 15 million for up to 5 discovery projects. So in terms of arts and humanities research in the UK, it's quite large scale. These are not normal sums of money within our sector. We're very pleased to be able to get them. The programme itself is coordinated by a programme directorate based at Historic Environment Scotland in Edinburgh, who I'm employed by. I saw one of my team is on the call, Carlotta, and I have a communications coordinator who has done my wonderful presentation for me, if you like the illustrations. And of course, we're not really based at Historic Environment Scotland, we're all at home, same as everybody else. So the foundation projects, as I say, there are 8 of them. They're each originally intended to run between 18 and 24 months. Several of them, most of them, have had to be extended because of the disruption. They started on the 1st of February. We went in lockdown in the middle of March, and that's caused a few problems, as you can imagine. They each have about £200,000. And all of them are led by what we in the UK call independent research organisations. So these are national cultural bodies that are recognised by the Research Council as doing research on a par with universities and thus can be funded like universities for that research. And each of those, what we call IROs, are in partnership with a university, with a higher education institution. And then most of the projects have further partners from the cultural sector. We're very pleased, especially in the current climate, that all of them are employing at least one digital humanities postdoctoral researcher. So that's been a good set of recruitment. And generally speaking, all of the projects are reviewing a current position, testing methodologies through case studies, and presenting recommendations for future practice. So I've got just a little tiny bit of information about each of them, and this is really not to go into projects in any depth, but to give you an idea of the range of work that's been covered in the foundation projects. Joe is not first because he's next on the call. This is just how it works in our listings. So the first project is based at the National Gallery, looking at Triple Aif. Then we have the National Archives looking at deep discovery. So they're looking at cross-collection image linking, pattern recognition, that kind of work. We've got two projects at the British Library. The first is dealing with geospatial data and how to connect collections in that way and how to engage the public using the location of things. And the second one, persistent identifiers, that's probably the most similar one to the Triple Aif in that it's looking at an international standard that exists already but isn't well adopted within the sector and how to make that happen. And I think Joe is on that one as well, aren't you, Joe? I think. And then we have Science Museum Group looking at Heritage Connector. So they're trying to create an engine that will analyze material and link it at a massive scale. Slightly different project at Tate, Provisional Semantics. So this is looking at the language within catalogues and where it no longer reflects how society thinks of itself and articulates itself, and how to support a more diverse public to engage with that information. That, of course, has become a massively more significant issue through all of the Black Lives Matter activity of the current year. So we have an awful lot of interest in that project. The second project at the National Archives is looking at engaging crowds. So it's taking citizen research and seeing where new elements can be built to citizen research to better suit heritage data rather than scientific data. And the final, Born Digital, is delving into the standards and practices that are needed to work with Born Digital archives. So moving on to the discovery projects, which is where the big money is going to sit. So the objectives of these discovery projects are pretty much the objectives of the whole program. So this is about carrying out world-class interdisciplinary research in key thematic areas, and the interdisciplinary is very key to this. That's one of the reasons we have strategic priorities funding, because we're able to work across disciplines and across organizations. And we want to be growing and diversifying audiences by introducing the public to new ways of engaging with the collections. And frankly, there's an awful lot of interest in how to communicate with parts of the public who haven't traditionally been engaged in this with collections already. We're looking at devising technological and organizational solutions to the barriers between online collections and catalogues, and Triple Aif developments would sit within that. And it's our mission to not just deliver benefit to the independent research organizations, the big, relatively well-funded nationals, but to actually ensure that the benefits of the programme reach right across the UK and right across different scales of organisation. And that may be in different ways, but we don't want this to be just benefiting the big guys. We want this to have much further reach. And critically, we want to create a sound evidence base for the future development of a virtual national collection. And that evidence base should be a persuasive evidence base, because that's what we're going to be using to try and leverage more funding to actually implement a lot of these initiatives on a larger scale in future. And of course, we want to produce evidence-based policy recommendations for how organizations can work and what kind of work can be funded. One of the key ways we're measuring whether people should be funded or not is how they deliver impact in each of these three areas. So you've heard them already, but just to reiterate, this is about dissolving the barriers between collections, and those can be technology issues, but they can also be organizational issues. Research capability is really important. Our money comes from a research council, so we want our projects to be developing ways to allow new kinds of research to be done, to allow researchers to look across collections in ways without them traveling all around the country looking at different things that they haven't been able to do before in the digital world. And we're very interested in public engagement, and particularly the independent research organisations being at the core of this. They all have public-facing remits, and we want to enhance and to innovate how the public can access our collections. And from the Research Council's point of view, we want to demonstrate the value of research to public outcomes. So you don't just chuck up an exhibition, you do years of research, you understand your collections, and you devise something from them. Collaborations are really key right throughout the project. So our large discovery projects have to have a collaboration of one or more university with one or more IRO, but they also have to work with other kinds of organizations, other kinds of collections right across the UK. And some of the ideas that are coming forward are working with regional museums, local museums, quite a lot of community-based organizations. So the spirit is being taken up of this reaching right across. And we found it important to say quite early on what we meant by a national collection, because people were getting quite exercised about the politics of it. And I didn't really want a lot of time and money being spent on that. So quite early on, we wanted to be able to say that all we're trying to say by a national collection is that it's the breadth and range of culture and heritage collections across the UK. It's nothing more loaded than that. So in terms of the timetable, the foundation projects, including Joe's, started on the 1st of February. So that's when the whole thing really got going. We currently have a funding call out for the discovery projects. If anyone on the call is interested and hasn't started an application yet, unfortunately, we close on the 17th of November, and you'd have to be a miracle worker to build your partnership and your proposal by then. But if you want to, give me a call. And then we're going to assess those outline applications and create a shortlist and invite the shortlisted applications to submit full applications, which they have to do by the end of April. That should allow everyone to start by the 1st of December next year. So, you know, this is not a quick fix. We won't really get going on the big projects till then. They'll run for 3 years, so they'll finish in November 24. And which gives me 2 months and my team to wrap up all the reporting and the evaluation of the programme to finish by the end of January 25. In terms of what we're going to produce from the Directorate, we're planning what we're calling at the moment a legacy report. And this is essentially to make the policy and practice recommendations that I was talking about. We don't want to wait till the last day of the project to make those recommendations and then have a huge lull while it takes however long to try and get funding. So we're aiming to bring that forward in 23-24. At the moment, it's tied to government financial planning, which is utterly up in the air at the moment. So that's why that date is a little vague. And then, of course, there will be a final report that will summarise what the programme overall has done to basically be a record. There's going to be very extensive externally commissioned evaluation of the impact of the programme, and I think that's going to be extremely interesting. We're just working out the specification for that at the moment. And of course, there'll be individual research reports coming out of each of the funded projects. And the first of those will be coming from the foundation projects. Don't worry, Joe, early 2021 still means you have to submit to me before Christmas, sorry, but coming out to our steering committee in January and then being made public. Just a final word really on how we've kind of survived the starting such a big collaborative program in such difficult times. So I would say on the negative side, which is obviously rather heavy, most independent research organisations and other collections have been heavily impacted by the furloughing of staff. I'm not sure if the word furlough translates, but that's essentially staff being put at home and paid partially, so they retain their job, but they're not allowed to do any work. And if you're not allowed to do any work, you can't have conversations about developing new projects in the future. So that's been extremely challenging for everybody. The universities haven't been impacted quite so much by furlough, but of course the move to online teaching has come at a real critical time when we wanted them to be thinking about wonderful research ideas. They're having to completely reframe their practice overnight. And our foundation projects, as I say, they started in February, so this hit them immediately, forcing them to pivot to being full digital working, and for some of the projects, no access to physical collections. Not all of the projects needed that, but those that did had to have a very rapid rethink. And some of the projects were also intending to work physically with community groups, and some of those community groups, the target, they ended up being in the sort of vulnerable category, and again, all of that had to be rethought. However, we're a digital program and everyone working on it are sort of digital people. So of course, COVID has actually had some positive results for us. So the foundation projects had all budgeted to hold series of events and workshops, and they were going to fly a few people in around the world. There were maybe going to be 20 people at each workshop. Suddenly, throwing them up online has massively increased the participation, as we've all discovered as we're doing right now. And that's actually been a real benefit to those projects in getting a much more international representation in the thinking around them. And from my point of view and my team's point of view, it's actually allowed me to work with so many more people than I would have otherwise. In fact, I have no idea how I'd have delivered the first year of this project if I wasn't sitting in front of a screen. I'd have spent my entire life on trains because I spend every day talking to the teams that are developing ideas. And this essentially is what makes this program different from most funding programs. It's not, we didn't publish what we wanted, sit back and wait to see what we get. I've been working with all the applicant teams throughout the process of building their projects to help guide them to ensure that what we get are the very strongest ideas that will create a portfolio of projects that will help us deliver. So Zoom has been a godsend for that process, an absolute godsend. And we certainly won't be stopping it if we're ever allowed to travel again. So if anyone wants to contact me, here are my details. And because I'm obviously a very, very good and well-trained person, here are all the credits for the images you've just seen. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's a great overview. And maybe after Joe, we can get into more about, the whole, the way it fits into maybe a global view of some of this. But I guess I'll pause here. Are there any questions now for anything Rebecca addressed in her portion there? And if not, that's fine. We can save them to the end and talk a bit after Joe goes next, or feel free to use the chat panel as we go. But in that case, Joe, do you want to go next and tell us a bit about the Triple Aif related project you've got going at this point that fits into towards the National Collection framework?
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, as appropriate. Let's see, share screen. Okay. Okay, now, hi, my name is Joe Padfield, as Josh said, and I am the principal investigator or leading the practical applications of Triple Aif as a building block towards digital collection. So we have created a project website, which doesn't have a huge amount on it at the moment, which I'll explain about in a second. And that will be developing, but I'll be talking more about that in a minute. So moving forward, the basic premise of our project was how can we best build a common infrastructure for sharing high quality images for heritage collections and sites? The answer, obviously, for most of the people on this call is by using Triple Aif. So Triple Aif provides international standards to share high resolution images on the web It's a good selection of free software to build solutions, a clear process for defining license for reuse, and originated from the Library and Archives, but obviously it has been growing substantially among cultural heritage institutions across the world over the last few years. Now, obviously, most of the people on this call will be aware of this, but the basic premise of the Triple Aif system is that you can have two institutions, for example, in this case, the National Gallery in London and Yale, presenting images on the web, and it is possible to then combine these images in one viewer within the National Gallery. So this National Gallery image server is an internal service within the National Gallery for us looking at all of the images we have. From conservation and scientific and photographic. They're all collected together and organized by object. As you can see here, what I've managed to do within a Mirador viewer is take a series of images that are presented by the Yale Centre for British Art and then compare and contrast both of them within the Mirador viewer, which is a standard Triple Aif image viewer, which is available for people to use. Now that follows the basic premise of the National Gallery has an image store and an image server, and they are then presenting an internal Mirador image viewer in this case. Yale Centre for British Art have an image store and a Triple Aif server, and they have a public IIP image viewer, which is available for people to view. But then the Triple Aif information is also public and can be ingested into the Mirador within the National Gallery. So the images are presented multiple times, but the images files themselves stay with their owner, with the connections maintained between owner and user. So it's a very flexible system, as many of you will be aware, and it fits the requirements for exploring the notions of a national collection very nicely. Now, the project is a collaboration, as Rebecca has mentioned, from a number of different partners. So myself at the National Gallery, but we also have co-investigators from the British Library, Thorsten Reumer, Charlotte Bullen from the National Portrait Gallery in London, and Melissa Terrace from Edinburgh University, and a broader group of project partners from the Royal Botanical Garden at Edinburgh, Digerati, Stanford University Libraries, Science Museum Group, the V&A, and now the Triple Aif Consortium as a whole as well, contributing and supporting the project. Now, as Rebecca said, the project began in February and immediately was paused somewhat because of COVID, and is sort of have a about a 6-month extension. So we have done a series of preliminary pieces of work, but the bulk of the activities will be carried out over the next 18 months between now and the extended end of the project. Now, the project aims as a whole is to highlight and demonstrate opportunities and benefits that the Triple Aif standard offer to a wide audience of institutions and researchers. So to some extent that aligns very nicely with the goals of the Triple Aif Consortium as a whole. We want to examine its potential to virtually connect collections from different organizations, allowing users to experience and interact images, resources, both for research and public presentations. And I should emphasize the notion again of the practical applications of Triple Aif here is we actually want to build stuff and allow people to do it rather than just theoretically show how people can do it. The next one is proved to be very simple because we want to document and list existing Triple Aif systems and tools, or contribute to existing lists and demonstrate how they can be used. Now, I have to say over the last few months, I've been exploring the Triple Aif is Awesome list, which is available through the main Triple Aif website. And that is an extensive list of all of the existing systems and tools that can be explored through Triple Aif. So that one has worked out quite nicely. And we want to identify what additional tools and services might be needed. So when it actually comes to building production systems and actually doing this in a working environment, what other things might be needed, particularly to help support smaller institutions that don't necessarily have a large IT department or server farms in their basement. Within the project, we are planning 3 and potentially a 4th now. Originally there were workshops, but as Rebecca said, they're all going to be webinars now. The first one we're hoping to have very, very soon. The other reason, just on a personal note, for the additional delay to the project is I myself went on paternity leave for a period of time, which again slowed things down a little bit for our project. But we'll be having the first one very soon, so to showcase and discuss current best practice of Triple Aif. And to discuss, the second one is to discuss the potential of shared IIIF services, and then a third one to develop practical IIIF solutions, so more of a hackathon or actual practical basis. The fourth workshop we are considering, or webinar we're considering now, is just a demonstration of the work that's been done by the end of the project, leading to the end. As Rebecca said, each of the projects have hired a dedicated researcher, and again, due to COVID problems, we have not been able to hire that researcher until about now. But hopefully we do have a person, and hopefully they will be able to be starting sometime in November again, which relates to our full sort of steam ahead over the next 18 months. Now, as part of the project, we want to be developing some practical IIIF demonstrators. So working across the collaboration we have with external specialists to demonstrate how things can work well. So the first one there on the top left is creating a research data set of 16th and early 17th century British portraits. This is aligning with an existing research project examining Tudor portraits, which comes through the National Portrait Gallery and a number of the partners they have in that project. So we will be working with that project team to then present some of their content and show how IIIF can be used to enhance the work that they're doing. We're wanting to develop demonstrators to support and enrich online publications or exhibitions. The classic example of this, if you're reading a art history related publication or anything else with images in it, and you read the wonderful line of "as you can see from the image in figure 1," and you glance across and there's a small thumbnail in the column at the side, and you can't really see any of the detail whatsoever. So the idea is to effectively present high resolution images that have been used by the actual researchers at the same resolution the researchers saw, in a direct connection with the publication. So we've been exploring that over the last few years with some of the National Gallery Technical Bulletin publications, but we're going to update all of those systems and make sure they're fully compliant with IIIF and demonstrate how that type of process can then be reused by other people for the same purposes. Developing a user-friendly prototype of IIIF manifest aggregator. So effectively, how do you take existing IIIF image collections, combine them together and create new ones, is another demonstrator we're hoping to aim at. And again, very nicely, we've had the ability to jump ahead with that, as one of our project partners, Digerati, has very nicely already created the basis of this, which I will show in a minute. So that's moving ahead quite nicely as well. And final one is developing new cases, new use cases, and exploring user needs and feedback as a result of the technical requirements moving forward for smaller institutions. Now, as I said, initially, the project work has been lower, smaller in case, because we didn't actually have the full-time researcher on board. So we've just been exploring smaller scale things. But initially, if we wanted to highlight and demonstrate the opportunities and benefits of IIIF standard to a wider audience, and you have a wonderful collection, thank you Microsoft for these wonderful little icons, of potential IIIF users, and then they are backed up by a wonderful support technical department and IT departments and institutions to provide technical support on IIIF. So with the correct resources and support, users can do quite a lot with IIIF. Now the question is, what can you then do if you don't have your own image server? And you don't have an IT department to set things up for you. So as part of the work to explore how we could generate project websites, I've been sort of exploring with how one might do this. So if we take, for example, Mirador. So Project Mirador on the left, you can go to that link and you see the probably an updated version 3 now, a nice instance of Mirador with a series of manifests listed behind it where you can compare and contrast lots of images. So generally in the past, if I wanted to actually have a look at images from IIIF, I'd have to go to Project Mirador and then load manifests into there and repeat this process each time I wanted to look at them. And then to be able to load them up and do some work and then go off and then have to, as I said, repeat again. So you'd end up with a list of manifests that you wanted to work with and have to reload them in each time into a public viewer to allow you to do that work. Now, as part of the premise for towards the national collection is the notion of trying to make the work as accessible to a larger number of collections as possible. So if the National Gallery is able to do something great, but if we then make it easier for the next institution to want to use it again and again and again and again. That then benefits a much wider group of people. So the project website for the project is actually on GitHub, and the process of generating that project website is actually automatic. It uses a small process called SimpleSite that I put together to allow websites to automatically be built based on simple JSON documents. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of that specifically at the moment. I have presented that in previous things before, but I'm very happy to answer questions on that. But the idea is that you can copy the instance on GitHub, edit the JSON document, and it'll create you your own project websites very rapidly. And I think 3 or 4 of the other foundation projects have actually done this for their own project website. But the reason I'm presenting it here is one of the extensions to that is that I've added in a process to automatically generate Mirador websites using the same process. So if you have the manifests you want to work with, you can effectively upload and create your own presentation of a Triple Aif viewer, and effectively create a bookmark system for yourself to store the work that you're working on and share it and discuss it with other people on the web using the free services and resources available through GitHub. So the way it works is that if you have a simple list of manifests you can here see in a text file, so 1, 2, 3, and then effectively this small piece of JSON document that describes the web page you want to appear. And as I said, how this works is described more in depth in the documentation for the SimpleSite system. But that information will then create this web page. So you have a Mirador 3 instance, you have the 3 manifests automatically loaded in there, defaulting to the first one, but then you can use a Mirador to compare and contrast those images or and so on and so forth. And if you then add another manifest to the list and hit save within the GitHub structure, it will automatically rebuild the page for you with then 4 manifests loaded in for you to work in. Now you can take that a step further. There are options to specifically set up how you would like Mirador to work, to have 1, 2, and there is an example with 6 different ones. And working out the logic of how that worked took quite a while. I did have a screenshot showing the configuration file for that, but I've decided to hide it because it's evil. But that is actually done and documented as an example of how you would set up Mirador to begin with to create 6 different manifests in a particular place, in a particular order, and select particular images when you start. Slightly more complex than I'd hoped, but yes, it's entirely doable. We've done that. But you can actually use this same system for more complex presentations if you wanted to, but the initial premise was the simple ones. Now, as I said, moving on to another example of what we were wanting to explore, Digerati has already created a nice manifest editor for helping less technical users to explore how to create lists of images they want to play with. So effectively, you could put these together and then drop them into your own simple Mirador instance and then be able to do the research that you wanted to do without actually having to install and set up any servers yourself. So this is what we're aiming at, and we're going to be following on quite strongly in the next few months, is that how we can make this easier for people without detailed technical infrastructures to make use and benefit from Triple Aif as a research tool rather than just institutions presenting their content through Triple Aif in the first place. Above this, we're sort of considering within the National Gallery and some of the project partners how you explore using Triple Aif and other resources to actually present content in a more standardized manner to explore things en masse. So how do we export annotations, images, files, metadata, collections information, which is what TMS stands for. It's a piece of software called Museum System. How you can produce all of that knowledge or data export through public websites into internal systems, but also then produce them for external systems for your reuse within programs under UKRI, EU projects, Wikipedia, Art UK, European and more global structures, but in a standardized way. So the combination of Triple Aif and well-documented metadata allows that to be a possibility. So this is what we're sort of holding in our minds as we're sort of looking through these practical applications, is how that this Triple Aif can be a building tool to do more rather than just an end goal in its own right. Now, I've highlighted the concept of PIDs. Rebecca did mention that one of the other foundation project is exploring persistent identifiers. And to actually make a Triple Aif system work well, the links to your images and manifests need to persist, or no one else can actually build any software or carry out any long-term research on your resources if you keep changing what the URL is. So the plans to create persistent links to IIIF resources is wedded quite strongly into the National Gallery's future plans, but also within the plans for the project. So hence the very nice and useful overlap between the Heritage PIDS project and the Practical Applications for IIIF project, seeing how the synergies between the two of them work well. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
That's great, Joe. Thanks very much for that, and all of it is obviously interesting and relevant. But I think one of the things that's just so compelling too is even at that early stage, the connection between what you were just describing, the persistent identifiers work in a different project, and the work you're doing to make Triple Aif kind of a little bit easier to use and less complex. I could say a bunch, but I want to pause and make sure other folks have a chance to ask questions of either Rebecca or Joe. Yeah, are there questions, or what questions do you have? I think is the way I'm supposed to phrase that. I'll pause there and see what folks have.
Could I pose a question to the audience?
Please, yeah.
My colleague Carlotta, who's on the call as well, although it's her day off, so I don't know how hard she's concentrating. She's undertaking an exercise at the moment of international benchmarking. Oh, she's alive. So she's looking across the world to see whether there are similar initiatives towards a national collection. And I just thought she might want to grab the opportunity of this group of people to ask whether there's anything you think she ought to be exploring in terms of comparable initiatives. She might have got there already, but she's only about halfway through that piece of work. So sorry, exploiting you, but it'd be really helpful.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear from others what pointers they have, but I think that's right on point. I think that's part of the reason we want this series is to draw together strands like that. So yeah, what other international or national nation scale efforts do people know of that they want to put forward, or even thoughts toward those?
I could say that there are several European-wide ones. I should say I haven't actually had a chance to have a chat about this yet because I was away for a while. I think we have a meeting arranged, but there's some large EU infrastructure projects which are looking at making use of IIIF. There's a very nice one called DISCO, which is exploring natural heritage, sort of science collections and actual physical objects. And I saw a nice presentation with them through the Research Data Alliance structure. And they are planning to make use of IIIF and have a lot of collection structures that need to join together. They aren't a legal entity yet. It's one of these wonderful European ERIC structures, but that's progressing quite well. There's a more heritage science-based one called ERIS, which is developing, which will also make use of this type of technology. And the notions of towards a national collection, the ability to aggregate research data from multiple institutions. So that one is developing quite nicely. There's the whole notion of the European Open Science Cloud, where there's connections there. And there's another very nice project called the Social Science Humanities Open Cloud Project, or SHOC, which is a huge project exploring data and connections of data and data storage and standards and a whole raft of things. A slight increase in medical data discussions that happened in that particular project over the last year. For some reason, I have no idea why that happened. But issues of sharing privileged information and private data and all these sorts of things. So there's a lot of work being carried out on the European scale that may well overlap some of the considerations of our program.
Just going to jump in. Ronald Haynes from Cambridge University. Thanks very much, Rebecca and Joe. Good to see you again. Can you say something about contrast or compare with Europeana, which you didn't mention, Joe? Just in the sense of Europeana, of course, is not fully Triple Aif, but heading in that direction. What are your thoughts about contrast?
There's the traditional or historic issue with Europeana, and then there's a difference between the current process, which is progressing very nicely. I think initially when Europeana started, there were some concerns about the fact that they wanted your data and then they do stuff with your data. Many of the discussions was towards a national collection, and it is towards, so we're not actually building a national collection at the moment, is more the notion of a modular approach where people are responsible for and present and manage their own information and then join a conversation of information and research that happens after that as an ongoing thing, rather than one big digital bucket that things get dropped in. So I think particularly smaller institutions have concerns of disappearing in larger buckets. So the ability to actually ensure people are surfaced is part of it. I think historically there's been a lot of problem with licensing issues to do with releasing of images, and that is relaxing, shall we say. So I think the whole notion of what Europeana is trying to do is becoming more fluid and available. But I think Europeana in general were tarred a bit with that negative expectation at the start, which was a bit unfair. They've done an awful lot of really good work. So I would expect that in the future, towards a national collection, and the types of data that they present will work quite nicely with initiatives like Europeana, who then might create more sort of virtual research environments and sandboxes for people to do research and explore things on top of the data, but then maintain that connection back to the hosting institutions so that they can see the impact and the value of their collections, and then gain information, hopefully in the long run, back to enhance what they can present and the stories they can tell.
Thanks, that makes sense. Just a quick comeback. They also, of course, have had more than a decade of growth, and they're changing, as you say. They also have the idea of a unified search across collection. Any thoughts about that for Tank?
My understanding, and I say this slightly apprehensively because I know a lot about the plan, some of the planned discovery project proposals that are going in. The initial projects, the foundation projects that are happening, some of them are exploring the notions of shared vocabularies, particularly, say, the issues of difficult language. Some of them are exploring Triple Aif interoperability, persistent identifiers that are allowing that kind of connection. The issue is that many of the cultural institutions in the UK, and I would expect worldwide, are a little further behind the foundational building blocks required for good, robust cross-collection searching. So the research that's being planned, hopefully in the next stage of the discovery projects, and in general, in a lot of research applications at the moment, are strengthening that potential so that cross-collection searching can be reality. I was involved in a number of EU projects where you'd have things where data was aggregated from multiple institutions, but because one person had the column in the database was material and support, and another one had material, you never ended up getting data from both columns at the same time. So the whole notion of using either structured vocabularies or semantic ontologies or any of these sorts of things as a glue to bring them all together is becoming a bit more realistic. And Triple Aif becomes a very, very valid part of that because many people don't know what's in the other collections. So if you can have an image front end to these sorts of things with a robust connected process behind it, it allows people with a much lower level of knowledge. It decreases the barrier of access. So people can carry out research if they're in the I don't know, trainer shoe industry, as opposed to an art historian. You can actually use potentially the impact of design or the impact of the art history or creativity in the past to influence more things in the future by doing proper cross-collection searching. So I think it's becoming soon. The technology's there, the understanding is growing, and there are a number of initiatives to try and upskill the technical levels within collections to allow that to happen. So I think what will be possible in the next 10 years will be a lot more than what was possible in the previous, he says optimistically.
Thanks, Joe. Real quick, I saw at least Bruno and Tom Crane for sure raised their hands. I just want to jump in real quick and mention what Regis was talking about in the chat, which is that the Japan search and cultural Japan are good pointers, I think, in this directional area. And actually, it's very relevant because that'll be the subject of the next call we're trying to put together on this exact topic, probably in January or February. We're still working out details, but those are really interesting. Don't have time to go into all of it now, but really interesting aggregation efforts, also cultural collection efforts, and Triple Aif connections there. Maybe Bruno, you were gonna mention what you know about Brazil, and then we can go to Tom.
Okay, so I'm thinking about the challenge of having, as you may know, the Brazilian bar for this kind of technical basis that would enable cross-search would be even lower. And one of the challenges that I foresee is to institutions that don't have the funding have on one-click CMS that it's already Triple Aif enabled. That would be the building block for whatever more complicated we can get on it. And I could point to two different efforts. This one that I shared, it's like 4 big institutions in Brazil that have funding, but they were not aware of Triple Aif, and they made a pool of drawings from different institutions. They are using one system that potentially could export Triple Aif manifests, but they are not into this discussion yet. And from the other end, there is this community-driven tool that it's a one-click plugin for WordPress, and they have Triple Aif in the roadmap, and they want to be able to, with very low tech environment, institutions can handle the metadata smartly and can export the data. So I would ask you if you are planning to support like a low denominator solution for the institutions that are in the least advanced scenario. So could be like the standard starting point for the institutions that you're working with.
Thank you.
Well, I could ask my question. I actually put my hand down again because Ronald asked the question I was going to ask about Europeana, really. But I guess I'll just make one observation there, that although, I mean, just from my understanding of Towards National Collection, that although there are similarities with Europeana, maybe Towards National Collection has a bit more focus on the experience of a collection rather than the aggregation of metadata. So although obviously the aggregation of metadata is essential to achieve that, it's the kind of experience and this conceptual idea of there being a national collection in digital form that people, you know, from all walks of life can access. And I think that maybe is another kind of distinguishing factor about them. The only other observation I go to make is it sounds like that the Discovery for Humans group in Triple Aif and Towards National Collection should have kind of embedded ambassadors in each other because their intentions are so aligned.
There is a primary intention that the researcher, when they begin on our project, will be a principal joining of that Discovery for Humans group. I kind of sort of promised this before the person had even been interviewed, but that is the definite plan.
And I'll give Joe credit. I mean, Joe has been involved in those calls, and I think there's definitely ambitions to have a lot of connection to Discovery for Humans, which is a little bit more the human-centered side of this notion of aggregation. But yeah, we encourage. I think this seems like it's of interest to lots of folks on this call, so I just pasted the link to the D4H group. So this is exactly the kind of conversation we wanted to foster. We are getting to the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of people's time, especially those you're getting toward the end of the day and the end of the week, thankfully. So I guess maybe we should wrap it there, but I want to encourage folks that places like our discussion group, Triple Aif Discuss, the email list, our Slack channel, like this is where we're trying to keep this sort of knowledge sharing and link sharing and projects collaboration going. So please let's keep that going, and I'll conclude just by giving my thanks and gratitude to Rebecca and Joe for giving us that overview today. And yeah, we hope you'll join us on future calls to try and keep this kind of collaboration and resource sharing going. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all.